I'm not going to indulge myself by asking him about the Dutch Golden Age. We're here to talk about Jews.
Surprise.
Yes. So you were brought up just down the road from here, weren't you, in Golders Green?
I was actually born in Welbeck Street. My mother was working for de Havilland Aircraft at the time at the end of the war. And the pregnancy from which I emerged, she would have no hesitation telling anyone who would want to hear was an enormous inconvenience, actually. And she would introduce me as the accident, actually, whenever she possibly could. Thank you, Mum. Oliver Shalom. We moved into London in reduced circumstances. And that was Golders Green. But it was such an interesting place to come to. It was very different. I mean, not that it's not interesting now, but it was very kind of cosmopolitan, hanging around the telephone boxes at the tube station, trying to do them damage occasionally, which is.
I've read that your father was really responsible for your love of words and literature and.
My dad really wanted to go into the theatre. That was his real passion. He took me a lot to the old Victor Shakespeare. I mean, his dad, Isaac, who I didn't know, my grandfather, said, if you go into the theatre, don't come home again. And my father sort of buckled, and he was in Cable Street, he was street corner orator, and he would stand at the back when I would do Should Britain Unilaterally Disarm and say, louder, Simon, louder. And that probably explains my entire life, you know.
There's a parallel with what you've just said, with the nature of what you were doing in your history, isn't there, in the tension, as it were, between the work of a historian, looking at evidence and so on, and the direct revelation of the Torah.
There was no archaeological evidence of what we all celebrate every Pesach. There is no archaeological evidence. Doesn't mean say it didn't happen. It's just that there is no archaeological evidence yet. At some point, I certainly think around the 7th or 8th centuries, in other words, before the destruction of the kingdom of Judah, history and the writing of the Bible actually converge. The crucial single piece of evidence, but it is the evidence of a thunderbolt of historical illumination, are these two tiny silver amulets, about 4 centimeters. You can easily walk past them in the Israel Museum, 4 centimeters or so long. Written in archaic Hebrew, which looks nothing like the Hebrew that you and I read. These silver amulets were found on the skeletal remains of bodies in the burial caves at Ketef Hinnom, just on what was the edge of Jerusalem, now inside Greater Jerusalem. And what's inscribed on there are passages, in effect, from the Book of Numbers, including the blessing, the Barakah of the Kohanim. So we know that before King Josiah is killed, pretty much towards the end of the 7th century BC, that part of the Torah, that part of the Bible was known. So it then becomes a living thing in its own right. You know, historian with all my kind of methodological antennae, waving and waggling there, needs to sort out, what is history and what is kind of religious storytelling, which is why the book begins not with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but it begins with Elephantine, with this colony of Judean soldiers on the borders between the Nile and Nubia. There was one kind of wonderful document written by a dad to his son, who's one of these mercenary soldiers. He's asked his dad to come south to Memphis. Obviously, he was somewhere in the mid-Nile, and the father was on the estuary, and to bring him kit and his back pay, and the father has failed to do this. And the dad writes this letter, which is classic of, pulling all the guilt. He said, I'm very, very sorry, I went to get your back pay, but they gave me the brush off, they said it's coming, and I didn't get your kit, and I missed you, but when you come back again from your posting, I'll have everything there. And then the 3 words from which all Jewish history unfolds, we're back to your thing again, those 3 words written in Aramaic, which are unanswerable. My heart's not so good. Then, likewise your mother. So he's not going to complain about that, so.
You told the JC in 1995.
Uh-oh.
No, it's not a catchy out question. That you found it incredibly difficult. Your exact words were, I find it incredibly difficult to write about Jewish history.
Oh, yeah.
Now that you've immersed yourself in it, was it 5 years or so?
I find it incredibly difficult to write about Jewish history.
Is it any easier?
No, but I'm so grateful for living long enough, really, to have a crack at it, I think, actually. The reason why the Bible is not just a series of prophecies and instructions and God, you know, Adonai Hashem being a kind of crosspatch at the latest transgression, but it is kind of real living humans with all sorts of flaws, you know, the lying, the deceitful Jacob, the cowardly Jonah, the lustful David HaMelech. There is, because there is already this kind of earthy sense of what Hebrew could do, which is so wonderful. I felt very, very daunted by the immense, not just Baron, but also, you know, the whole tradition from Zunz and Gretz and these immense kind of extraordinary kind of canyons and forests of great scholars before me. Robert Alter, you know, bless him, sort of said Schama is the greatest expert at haute vulgarisation, at high vulgarization, but it's a hat I wear with pride, actually. I'm very happy to popularize the scholarship which otherwise people wouldn't know. So that's a reason why I got it. But, you know, is it easier? I mean, you know, you don't go into Jewish history expecting it ever to be easy, really, I don't think.
One of the things I was most struck by in the whole reaction to the whole series was Jewish friends of mine reacting to your bold statement, I am a Zionist. It's quite remarkable that it's remarkable.
Yeah.
It's that must have filtered through to you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm a Zionist. And it is exactly because another motive for embarking on this, I think when I got the phone call from lovely Adam Kemp, who's, you know, I don't think I did ever say to the BBC I want to do a series on Jewish history. My dad, not my mum, always used to say, you only regret what you don't do. He said that to me when I was wondering about whether I should do History of Britain. And partly because of the rising tide of anti-Semitism, many people now think in Britain about Jews were either victims or bullies. You know, were victims were as piles of bones in front of the bulldozers, or were supposed to be these authoritarian monsters in Israel and militaristic monsters. Zionism is a complicated thing. You don't have to approve of every new settlement that's stuck in the middle of West Bank. God knows I don't. In order to say I'm an unapologetic Zionist. The distinction is between what the Israeli government does and what Israel is. You can be a critic of what the government does, or not a critic, depending on it, but not, I think, a critic of what Israel is, I think, well, you can be a critic. Anyway, that's why I did that. You know.